Okay, welcome everybody to the July 8th, 2020 Planning Commission Board of Zoning Appeals. I apologize for not being there personally. I have some housing issues, a contractor showing up, so hopefully he appears momentarily. He's supposed to be here 20 minutes ago. So we could rise and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If we could call the roll, please.
Rich Bardak.
Here.
Rick Lauer. Here. Susan Rissover.
Here.
Scott Wolf.
Here.
Scott Rubenstein. Here. Kevin McDonough. Here. Wes Brown. Here. Scott Larmer. Here.
Regarding the minutes of the June 1st, 2020 meeting, does anyone have any revisions or corrections? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. We have a couple preliminary issues I'd like to announce. Residents watching online are able to request the password should they wish to speak at the email address tpreasoner, I'll spell it out, tpreasoner @amberleyvillage.org. Residents wishing to speak are asked to begin by introducing themselves and stating their address for the record. Those in chambers are asked to speak clearly into the microphone, and callers are asked to turn off the sound on their computers if they are streaming the video while speaking. Documents are available for download online at amberleyvillage.org under Council Agendas. The first case on tonight's agenda is case number 2020-1679. Wes, if you would introduce that for us.
Yes, the Lewis Animal Hospital is in the process of purchasing 2.2 acres of the former Amberley Swim Club property. The village, from the village, to construct a 12,000 square foot animal health facility. The proposed animal hospital would be located in the North Site zoning district and is a permitted use. The North Site regulations allow for a building to be 60 feet tall, which is 40 feet higher than the 19 feet 8 inches that the proposed building for Lewis. The regulations call for a minimum of 3-acre lots. However, the 2.2-acre lot was included in the lot split that was approved by the Planning Commission in December of 19. The Planning Commission approved the creation of 3 separate parcels, 2.08 for Mercy, which is a leased property, 2.2 acres, which is the proposed Lewis Animal Hospital, and then there's a future development on a 2.2 acre lot, which is farther to the west, closer to the maintenance facility. The proposed animal hospital and parking lot meets their all required setbacks for the North Site district. The development also meets the minimum of 61 parking spots, off-street parking spots, required by section 154.79. That is for the 12,000 square foot building, which is six spaces plus 1 space for every 200 feet over 1,000. Section 154.79 also calls for sidewalks to be installed on both sides of all streets and from the building to the street. The proposed development is landlocked by village-owned property with no public streets or sidewalks to connect to. As with the Mercy Hospital building, it has also been determined that sidewalks are not required for this project due to the access being a driveway, not a public street, and the access is through an easement, not a right-of-way. Plus, the village does not own the parcel that abuts Ridge Road. Exterior lighting, I'm going to pull some pictures up here while I'm speaking, if I can. I'll get the mouse to work.
Okay, is there a representative? Is Mr. Fairley present? Feel free to come forward. I'm
want
going to
me to keep
rely on
going?
Rick Lauer to be my eyes since I can't see what's happening. Yeah.
Let me, so the sidewalks we determined are not permitted, or not required for this project. The exterior lighting, the plan submitted for the exterior lighting meets the 0 foot candle at all residential property lines. The plans show 0.0 to 0.1 foot candle at the center of the access driveway, which is approximately 20 feet from all residential property lines. The dumpster/trash handling area meets the minimum setbacks and is located on the south side of the west driveway, or parking lot, I should say, approximately 85 feet from the south or the Ronald Reagan property line. The trash handling area is proposed to be in an accessory structure that contains both an enclosed storage area and the trash handling area. The walls that surround it's one structure, but the walls that surround this are 8 feet 4 inches tall, with the double gate blocking the north side of the trash handling area, and then the storage unit will actually have a garage door type door. The proposed structure does require a variance. The village code states that accessory structures shall not cover more than 200 square feet in floor space and are not permitted to not be permitted in the front yard, and the doors not facing the street. The proposed structure for the enclosed storage and trash handling area is proposed to be 226 square feet and is located in the front yard for Ronald Reagan Highway. And the doors for the storage unit do face, well, they don't face the street, but they face the access driveway. So I added that in there. And then the landscaping regulations call for streetscape buffers, boundary buffers, and interior parking lot landscape. The streetscape requirement calls for it to be 10 foot in depth and consist of 4 understory trees or canopy trees and 3 shrubs per 100 feet. The animal hospital frontage along the access driveway is approximately 340 feet, which requires 12 trees, 9 shrubs. The plans show 12 trees and 9 shrubs, plus 12 blue Pacific junipers along the north driveway, satisfying the streetscape requirement. The boundary buffer is the same requirements as the streetscape. However, the Lewis Animal Hospital does not abut any residential properties, so the boundary buffer is not required. The interior parking requirements call for 22 square feet of landscaping per parking space, 1 tree and 3 shrubs per 10 parking, 1 tree and 3 shrubs per 10 parking spaces. The plans show 61 parking spaces, which would require 1,342 square feet, 6 trees and 18 shrubs. The plans show 2,700 square feet of landscape in the parking lot, 6 trees and 18 shrubs, and several other ornamentals and understory trees. The architectural regulations, the features, this will be a brick and mortar building with metal siding in between the different levels of the sloped metal roof. The architectural features surround the main entrance, including the covered entry, and also at the center of the north and south facing walls. The sign regulations, the north side code regulates wall signs and monument signs. The plans propose to have two 40 square foot wall signs, one on the north wall and one on the south wall. The north wall actually meets code, but the south wall sign will need a variance. The plan also calls for a monument sign to be placed at the driveway at the access drive. The sign will be 5 feet.
You are muted. You are unmuted.
I'm sorry. The sign is proposed to be 5 feet 2 inches high and 7 feet 4 inches long and 5 feet from the back of the curb of the access driveway. There will be a second sign that will be proposed to be underneath the existing Mercy sign. So it will be part of the same sign. Their sign will be raised up, and Lewis Animal Hospital sign will be put underneath it. We do not have plans for that one, so we will need approval for that sign once we know what the design looks like. So the required variances for the Lewis Animal Hospital, we have a variance is required from section 154.14A to allow for the 8-foot-high combination wall and fence surrounding the outdoor courtyard to be constructed on the south side of the building in the Ronald Reagan front yard. This is a dog run that the dogs will be allowed to go out and run freely inside this fenced-in area. A variance is also required for section 154.82B to allow for the second 40 square foot wall sign on the south-facing wall facing toward Ronald Reagan Highway. And the third variance will be for the accessory structure to allow it to be constructed at 226 square feet in the front yard for Ronald Reagan Highway, and the door for the storage unit to face north toward the access driveway.
Okay, Rich. I think at this part of the meeting, we would ask if the applicant wanted to step forward and introduce themselves and let us know if they had any additional comment.
Good evening. I'm Brent Fraley with Fraley & Fraley. We represent Les and Molly Pulaski, the owners of Lewis Animal Hospital. Wes has done a fine job of explaining the project, and I'm not going to reiterate anything. I'm just here for any questions that you folks may have at this time.
I do have a question. I don't see the dimensions of the outdoor courtyard area on any of these drawings. Do you know offhand?
I don't know off the top of my head, but the outdoor courtyard should be on the architectural drawings.
Probably on this one, I just can't see it.
Possibly page 3 of that, Wes.
Yeah, I do see it on this one. Never mind.
Okay.
It looks like it's about,
And the whole
30.
idea of the courtyard is it's a fenced area, and the reason we put the iron fence on top is just so we don't have any breeds that have extra jump height, get out of the courtyard. The courtyard is a park-like setting with a bioturf inside, so it's a pretty, it'd be a really nice area, and it just keeps from having a fenced area to let them out. It's just a little nicer look for everything as far as aesthetics.
I know there were concerns with the residents in Reading that they would hear the dogs barking. It sounds like having that more walled in might cut down on that as well, and it's on the other side of the building.
Yes, correct. And that's a lot of the idea of having the brick and mortar wall inside that area. But, with an animal hospital and animal health, you really need to get the animals outside some and sunshine and fresh air.
Sure.
Sir, could you just talk a little bit more about what Lewis Animal Hospital does? Is it strictly for animals that need medical care, or is it a boarding facility?
They do well health checkups. They do a lot of surgeries, anything that goes along with animal health. They're basically a animal clinic, does anything an animal clinic does, plus any and all surgeries unless it's a specialty surgery. A lot of the boarding and killing area, is for recovery and hospitalization.
Because I did notice on the plans that there would appear to be a number of like individual kennels for
Correct.
animals, and
There will be some boarding, but, not a lot of boarding. It's there for some boarding for folks that go out of town, that's actual clients, and then hospitalization after surgeries and things of that matter.
And maybe this question is better directed to Scott, and it's not strictly a zoning issue, but where does this stand in terms of the discussions with the village over the purchase of the property? Is this the last contingency, or is this first step of the process? Where do things stand overall?
This is Scott Larmer, Village Manager. We are about 3/4 of the way through the process of this transaction. So it's an economic development project. We did enter into a purchase contract in November of 2019. There were several contingencies on the particular contract. At council's meeting in June, they extended the contingency timeframe to the second week of August. This was one of the contingencies to gain approval for the site plan as well as seek the necessary variances. But other than that, after this, there's just a few other boxes to check and then it'll be ready to go.
Thanks, Scott. And just to be clear, our role here is strictly with respect to zoning. I don't have an opinion, but this looks like a very nice project for the village. It's nice to see that the land is being developed. It's why we, I think, enacted the zoning regulation relative to this area to encourage development. So I'm glad to see that an appropriate user has come forward, and that's all the questions I have. Thank
Yep, we're very excited to have Lewis Animal Hospital here at Amberley Village. So.
I do have one more question about the design, so if we could maybe swap people back, sorry. I noticed on the drawing here, it says it looks like it's within the building, says outdoor kennel area, and part of it says indoor boarding.
So the indoor is conditioned, air conditioning and heat and all that. Then there's a little bit of portion that's fresh air area, and it is just ventilated with ventilation and fans. But it still has walls all the way up with just a small area at the top that's open air.
Okay, and that's also along I'm trying to figure out, because these drawings...
That'd be along the east side,
Flipping.
the hospital side, Mercy side.
So there could potentially be barking noise coming from that part of the building as well.
With an animal hospital, you're going to have a little bit of it, but I'll be honest with you, we've built hospitals and clinics in the parking lots of Kroger's and strip centers and things of that nature, and we're not having any issues with that.
So it looks like, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around this. Looks like space for 24 dogs or whatever to be boarded in that outdoor space.
That could be possible, yes. That sounds like the correct number.
And they're left out 24/7? They're not?
No.
Okay.
If they was left out all the time, they would be in the conditioned part. That is just to get them outside. So
Gotcha.
they are
Okay.
not left out all the time.
I
no.
see. Okay, thank you.
Have there been any comments from any residents or our neighbors in Reading about this?
I've not received any comments directly myself, but I do believe we have at least one resident, David Powell, from Reading, who asked to, believe, make comments. So, Tammy, is David on the phone with us?
David is on the phone. I'm hearing from a couple of the online guests that they're having trouble hearing. So if everyone could just make sure you're speaking into the microphone and loudly. And I know it's tough with the masks, but...
Okay. So, David, are you there?
He's on mute.
So he needs to unmute? Okay. David, you need to unmute if you can hear me. While we're waiting on David, if we can find out if any other residents here would like to speak.
Is anyone here in the hall who wishes to speak on this topic? No, okay.
In the meantime, I do have another question. Would this be an okay time to... Okay, regarding the parking lot, I know when we've done some of the more recent zoning changes and conditional use permits, we have required that the parking lots use good water management practices as far as like not putting curbs around the islands within to allow drainage into the beds and things like that. Can you speak to the way that this parking lot is designed?
Well, the perimeter of the parking lot does not have any curbs or anything. There's a fair amount of sheet drainage on this parking lot. The islands do have curbing in the islands to keep the landscaping in. We find without the curbing on the islands, it's a disaster as far as people getting into the islands and all that. So very little curbing, just the islands. What is there, two or three islands there that does have curbing around. The rest of the parking lot does not.
Okay, but since there is a detention pond or something on the site, that would
Correct.
take care of any
Yes.
runoff that would come?
And
And I don't
detention-
see where it would have any impact on any of the residences around.
Yeah, detention does have the outlet has a filtration system and you know, all that, so.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have our residents available to speak, Tammy?
Mr. Powell, are you able to hear us? He's unmuted, but I'm not able to hear anybody. Let me try redialing the number. Let me try calling the number one more time.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound. Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press pound to continue. After the tone, please record your name. When you have finished recording, press pound.
Council Chambers.
You are in the meeting now. There are 9 participants in the meeting. You are muted. You are muted. You can mute or unmute yourself by pressing *6. You are unmuted.
Okay, Mr. Powell, can you hear us now?
I can hear now.
Okay. We may have had a bad connection.
Okay.
Are there residents who wish to speak with respect to this application for the animal hospital? Or we have Mr. Powell?
Mr. Powell, are you able to hear us?
Just barely. You guys sound like you're about 1,000,000 miles away.
Well, Mr. Powell, go ahead and start. We can hear you just fine.
Okay. Well, all in all,
Sir, could you state your name for the record and your address, please?
Building. My name is David Powell, 705 Maple Drive in Reading. All in all, the building, it's a nice-looking building. I do have a couple of concerns about it. One would be on the east side of the building. There are 22 outdoor kennels. And I'll read a sentence from the Lewis Animal Hospital's website under a service that they offer where it talks about their boarding. And it refers to about having to keep their cats separate from the working dogs, which is quiet, and helps keep them from encountering stress that can come from open and loud boarding kennels. So on their own website, they state that their kennels are loud. So that being on the east side of the building is going to put out, I'm afraid, quite a bit of noise into the neighborhood. Not necessarily for myself personally, unless I would get some reflected audio or audio off the Mercy building, but people up the street, it would be an issue. The other thing at the northeast corner, and it's on sheet A2, at the northeast corner of the building, which again is, on the Maple Drive side of the development, they have their HVAC equipment and a generator at ground level with a 4-foot high wall around it. I kind of have a fear that is going to produce some noise as well into the neighborhood. The other issue that I have is on the north side of the building. They have a sign on the building, and it basically faces directly to the neighborhood. And pretty much the neighborhood's is what's going to see. I'm assuming that these are illuminated somehow. I don't know if they are backlit or what, but that was the whole thing on the Mercy site, was to keep originally the Mercy building was designed with a sign on the north face of the building, and that was removed. I would like to, see the plan modified for that as well. Really, those were probably my biggest concerns. The other thing I just want to point out, everybody keeps referring to this as the animal hospital, but there's a significant amount of animals that are going to be boarded here. You're talking, they have 39 indoor kennels and 22 outdoor kennels. So they're going to have a significant presence of overnight animals. So that was really all the comments that I had.
Thank you, sir. Are there other residents who wish to speak? Sorry, Rich, are you back on? Can you hear us now?
Yeah, I can hear. Does anybody else wish to speak? Rick, feel free to chime in at any time. And we can take
Rich?
control. Yeah.
Rich, this is Scott. Could they address Mr. Powell's concerns for me, please?
Yeah, sure.
This is Brent Fraley. I represent the applicant. I'll start with the signage, just since that was the last one and freshest on my mind. The signage on the private drive side of the building is just cut letters with down lighting. So the sign is not illuminated. It just has down lighting. And in the photometric, that down lighting was addressed in the photometric with no trespass past the property line. As far as the air conditioning equipment, it's very quiet equipment. I don't see any noise level coming out of that equipment, and the wall is there to block that noise if there is any. Generator, you may hear some noise out of the generator at some point in time, but the generator is just a backup generator, and I just don't see that happening as well. It's a Generac generator. They're very quiet, so I don't see that proposing a problem. We talked about the outdoor boarding before you were on the line, and
yeah, we couldn't hear.
We talked about the outdoor boarding area. It is brick and mortar. The only reason it's outdoor, it's under roof, it's surrounded by brick and mortar. It just has fresh air coming in about a 16-inch gap at the top. And I mentioned earlier, we have these projects in a lot of commercialized, busy neighborhood areas, and to date, we've not had any barking and noise problems.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak from the public?
Do we know if there's anybody online that wishes to speak other than the gentleman that just spoke from Reading?
I do not. There are several attendees online, many of whom have their microphones muted, but we've established that everybody can hear now, so.
Have we received any commentary, Scott, from any residents on this issue that haven't, via email or otherwise?
No, we have not received any commentary from residents.
Any discussion? Or anyone have any questions for Mr. Fraley that I may have missed?
I just wanted to point out in terms of discussion, that we have 3 variances here in front of us. One is to allow an 8-foot high combination fence. The other is for the second 40 square foot wall mounted south facing sign, the one that faces towards Ronald Reagan. And the third is to allow for the construction of an accessory structure to enclose the trash handling area. In terms of those 3 variances, I personally don't have any issues. I think that the higher wall, not only does it face the highway, but it would be an advantage in terms of reducing noise and, distraction to the animals that might be in that outdoor area. I think that's a benefit to the neighborhood for that. The second 40 square foot sign is south facing towards Ronald Reagan. I do share the concerns that we heard about any north facing sign. But I don't know that that's part of what we're here to consider tonight, honestly. So if it complies with the zoning, if the north-facing sign complies with our zoning code, then I don't know that this board can do anything about that. I think our village council does, however, have the opportunity perhaps to make any necessary adjustments, if any, to the plans as they continue negotiating with the potential buyer. And then the third variance, I think it's in everybody's best interest that we have a larger accessory structure to hide the dumpster and the trash handling. So I'm in favor of all these variances and would move that we pass them.
I would agree. I'm in favor as well, for the record.
And I'm pretty sure when I saw the plan that went along with landscaping. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct, Scott. There was some discussion from Wes about the landscaping complying with the existing regulation.
So can we just add that part in, and it would be consistent with what the plan is that they submitted to us, including the landscaping?
Yes, I would add that to the motion. I think that's implied.
Okay.
They have to
Thank
comply. But yeah.
So do we have a motion? Anyone like to make a motion?
Sorry, I thought I made a motion, but I'll do it again.
I'll second it.
All in favor? Or do we do a vote?
Aye.
I forget. Do a roll call? Sorry.
Did everyone approve? I couldn't hear that part.
We're going to do a roll call because
Okay.
we can't all see and hear each other. Rich Bardak,
Yes.
Rick Lauer,
Yes?
Susan Rissover,
Yes.
Scott Wolf,
Yes.
Scott Rubenstein.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Second case on the agenda is case number 2020-1677, public hearing to review the special zoning district for the Emberley Green. Scott, I assume you're going to do the introduction on this, or Wes?
This is Scott Larmer, Village Manager. Before you this evening is a proposed zoning code text as it relates to Amberley Green and referred to as Amberley Green Development District zoning text. This has been in the works for quite some time. Village Council has been intimately involved with this, and staff from Hamilton County Planning Department has been involved with it as well. So with us this evening is Brian Snyder. Brian sitting right here to my right. Brian is the Development Services Administrator of the Hamilton County Department of Planning and Development. He walked staff through the process and worked with us to vet various codes to come up with the Amberley Green Development District zoning text. And then we went forth to Village Council to get their input and to understand what some of their objectives were. Part of the objectives that we were working on, and part of the benefits of putting this zoning in place, is we certainly wanted to protect existing property values by preventing incompatible uses. This particular zoning text is a little different because it encompasses quite a few types of uses, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. We also wanted to preserve the recreational area and allow for more open space, and that was a very defining item for Village Council. We also wanted to enforce strict height limitations and space requirements, building size and development standards like that. We wanted to keep buildings being built from being built too close together, so that was another benefit of putting zoning on Amberley Green. We also wanted to enhance the beauty of the community by requiring landscaping and buffers as well as parking lot improvements, and certainly protect any residential properties from commercial development. Obviously, this property is surrounded by some residential, so that was a concern as well. And then the last item was to facilitate the attractive growth with community involvement, which is part of our process this evening. I'd just like to point out that Amberley Green is currently zoned for single-family residential, so that's residential A. And it's been like that since the village acquired the property in 2008. Single-family residential is not solely what the village would like to see on the property, and the zoning text is being created that would enable a variety of uses on the property. But the key point here is the village owns the property, and so the zoning becomes secondary, but it certainly is still necessary for any kind of development on the property. So while the village is safeguarded because we own the property, and we certainly have a strong preference for open space as well as walking trails, it was necessary to identify the principal permitted uses that could be permitted on the property. So that is a significant piece of the zoning text, identifying the various uses on the property. So first and foremost, active and passive recreational uses is being proposed. That includes pools, splash parks, sports fields, courts, outdoor amphitheater, public parks, walking trails, dog parks, woodland preservation areas. The second principal permitted use could be single-family dwellings. The third category would be community gardens or agriculture. The fourth would be the banquet or an event center. Another category, government public buildings and facilities. Other institutional uses like religious institutions, daycare centers, hospitals, schools, universities, and other educational related facilities could be a principal permitted use. Nursing homes or assisted living facilities is identified as a principal permitted use. Offices, including professional business offices, restaurants without drive-throughs. And then the last category is retail uses and or facilities within a mixed-use building. So it means that so that type of use could not exceed 20% of the total square footage of a building. So that's probably the most important part of the code as it relates to the uses for the property. This is not a zoning code that is driving any particular use here. We're not trying to get the property developed for nursing homes or a banquet. We're just trying to identify any type of use that has been discussed or considered and trying to incorporate that into the zoning text. And it's important to point out that if it's not included in the principal permitted use, then it cannot occur on the property. The balance of the code spells out the setbacks. It talks about the site development regulations, landscaping, signage, and architectural regulations, as well as the procedures as it comes before the Planning Commission and then ultimately goes to Village Council. One of the items that was prepared in advance of the meeting tonight was a series of 3 videos.
This meeting is being recorded.
3 videos where talked about information for residents. The first one was just sort of talk about zoning and what it means, what is zoning. The second one was what was included in the zoning code text. And then the third is what is the next step? What's after that? So we are now at that point of holding a public hearing to seek comment from residents about the proposed zoning text. Your role as the Planning Commission tonight is to take any consideration and make any suggestions that you hear, and then make a recommendation back to Village Council about the zoning text itself. Village Council will hold its own public hearing, will seek the same type of public comment, and then ultimately Village Council will be asked to take action on the ordinance as it stands. So at this point, we're ready to open the public hearing and seek comment from any residents that want to participate. I would just point out that Brian Snyder is available to answer questions or elaborate on certain parts of the text if you would deem that necessary.
I did have a
It's
number.
approximately 7:41 p.m., so let's go ahead and open the public meeting. I think it makes sense to start with the people in chambers. I'm kind of going to rely on Rick to be the bird dog on that. I'd only ask that any residents, whether they're speaking online or in person, please identify yourself, give your full name and address, because we're taping this and we're keeping a full record of who's present. So anyone wishing to speak, feel free to come forward.
Mr. Katz.
Thank you, Mr. Lauer. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to...
Louis, we all know you, but would you mind just stating your name and address for the record? Thanks.
Happy to do that. Louis Katz, 6785 East Beachlands Drive, of course, Amberley Village. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here tonight on this proposed zoning. As most of you here and some of you out there in Zoom land and TV land know me, Louis Katz, and I've lived in the village in my own home, not my parents' home, since 1986. My parents lived here and actually died here, and my sisters live here. I was on the front lines of the Save Our Village. Rick, you were close by. Rich, your uncle, and Diane Levine just left, and Susan Glazer were the ones that started Save Our Village. And as a result of that, I ran with a slate, some of current council members, because we had a vision for the village. I served on council for 6 years without taking any compensation as a council member. During those 6 years, I was also the magistrate and served likewise without compensation. On council, we replaced the village manager and brought in Scott, which was a breath of fresh air. We replaced, I don't know whether Rich Wallace is here or not online, but we replaced the chief of police with Rich Wallace, who's done a terrific job. We replaced the city solicitor with the predecessor, Kevin, with the new Kevin McDonough, who's also done a fabulous job. So we accomplished a lot on our council, including settling the lawsuit with Rick's help and also the purchase of Amberley Green. In fact, some of you may know I was the one that coined the term Amberley Green. Among other things that we did on council, that I did, is I forced the purchase of the house on Furman and Ridge Road, which opened up the north site, which led to the development of Mercy and now the Lewis Animal Hospital. It could not have been done if I had not had the vision and the foresight to say we need to buy that house. And in fact, the money for it came from estate taxes from my father. I was also instrumental in helping the Jewish Foundation buy La Santaville School. When I found out it was for sale, I worked behind the scenes to get that purchase, which helped maintain our southwest corner of the village there. I'm just skipping ahead here. We know that single-family houses would not be the right result for this magnificent piece of property. It would cost the village money and it just wouldn't pay for itself. And that was the majority of why we were fighting to prevent the development at that time. But we had a vision. We had a vision that in the right hands, this property could become a jewel, could help put Amberley even more on the map than it was. That would significantly increase our home values and make this even a better place to live. I feel so strongly about it that I risked coming here tonight with the significant health hazard that exists to tell you my thoughts with regard to this proposed zoning ordinance. The plan reminds me of the saying that a camel is a horse designed by a committee. That saying emphasizes the ineffectiveness of incorporating too many conflicting options into a single project through compromise. In my estimation, this proposal epitomizes this approach. I fear that we've lost our vision, or at very least it has been dimmed by time and frustration. This proposal has nothing original in it. It's a mishmash of ideas without any cohesive thread running through it. There's nothing here about the expenses that the village, that we, the residents, would have to incur. There's no impact fee ordinance, but the expenses of development will be significant, and it'll fall on the backs of the homeowners, the residents. This, in my estimation, is worse than no zoning on the property at all. There's nothing about roads, sewers, hard surfaces, traffic. It's so indefinite that I would believe that the village could be backed into a corner like it was once before with a lawsuit saying that under this zoning, you cannot prohibit what we want to do on the property. I'm vitally concerned about that. I fear that the committee and village council is on the verge of capitulating for fear of being branded as not doing anything, or worse, maybe even being bullied into a disastrous mistake. I'm here to tell you that not doing anything without a vision, which apparently we don't have yet, is better than doing this so badly. I would conclude by saying that this is the wrong time to make this decision. With the virus, our residents are fearful of coming out of their homes. To make the proposal now, in light of the pandemic, has the appearance of being somewhat railroaded, or even worse, downright sneaky and dishonest. I am asking you to table this discussion now until after the virus passes. Let's get back on our feet. Nothing's going to happen now anyway. Let's not compromise. Let's not give up on our dreams. Let's seek a vision, or remember our vision, of designing this property that will enhance the life in our village. Thank you all.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? I don't see anyone else here in the chamber that wishes to speak. Is there anyone else online who wants to speak on this topic? Tammy?
Can we do a sound check with those online? I'm getting feedback that they're not able to hear again.
Oh, how about Rich? Can he hear us? Is it possible you muted muted?
No, it's still connected.
What about hit *6 again? See if that. Yeah.
Okay, let me restart it.
Sorry, everyone. Apparently, the call dropped again for some reason. I don't know how much of Mr. Katz's comments you were able to hear, but rest assured they were recorded and heard by everyone here in the chambers. We're asking if there are others online, members of the public, who wish to comment on the matter before us. And Rich and Scott, can you hear us?
Got it.
Yes.
We can hear now.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to comment?
There are several callers who have their phones muted. You need to press *6 to unmute your phone if you wish to speak.
Okay, while we're waiting for that, I had a couple of questions and comments about the text that I'd like to propose. And I don't know if Scott or our representative from Hamilton County can answer these for us. I'm just a little confused about what the anticipated process would look like, because on one hand, you have a zoning code that lays out fairly objective requirements in terms of use and parking and landscaping and things of that nature, all of which we're used to seeing in zoning codes. And then there is a process identified that starts with a concept plan and goes through various approvals from the, I guess, the Planning Commission as well as the council. And I guess I'm just confused about how this process would work. Imagine hypothetically if I were a developer and I wanted to build an office building, I don't understand the concept. Normally you would present an application for a zoning certificate and say my office building meets the objective requirements of the code, but that doesn't appear to be what we're proposing here. Can you walk me through how this would work functionally if this were to pass as is?
This is Scott Larmer, Village Manager. I'll give you a quick overview of that, and then I'll turn it over to Brian to be more detailed on it. So one thing that the village lacks here is a planned unit development zoning text. So we do not have what's referred to as a PUD. Our zoning here is more traditional, and so we could not pull together different pieces of the zoning districts in order to make a PUD that could be applied to this site. So then we went to alternative B, which was to create our own zoning text similar to what was created, the process that was created for the North Site zoning. So that's why you're seeing in this particular text all the variety of types of uses, and we've outlined specifically what the process is for an applicant. So concept plan is submitted to staff, it's vetted through staff, and then it comes to Planning Commission for your review. And then you're reviewing your recommending body, and then it goes on to Village Council, and then that's where the process kicks in. If they get the final approval from Village Council, then the developer moves forward and makes the final plans. So that's sort of a quick and dirty way of looking at this particular zoning text. But it is not typical in the sense of our current zoning code because of the complexity of this particular, the types of uses that we are including. So we're making it in such a way that it's a one-step process for the zoning, but it's a multi-step process for approval and to gain any kind of approval through the Planning Commission or the Village Council.
So are you saying anything that would be built on that property would require a conditional use permit that we would have to okay?
No, we're not talking about conditional use at all. We're talking about the entire property would have to be zoned for this Amberley Green District. And then when an application comes in, let's say somebody wants to build a dog park on the property, they would submit an application to via a concept plan and walk us staff through that process. That we will vet that, and then it comes to Planning Commission as a plan. And then you would be reviewing that, similar to review the site plan tonight from the Lewis Animal Hospital. And then that plan, assuming it had recommendations for approval, would go on to Village Council. If it had recommendations for changes or even denial, that would go on to Village Council as well.
Scott, the thing that concerns me a little bit, and again, I recognize that the village owns this property, so we don't have to do anything we don't want to do. So at the end of the day, council doesn't have to sell the property to anybody. But hypothetically, if I came in and said, I want to buy a half acre, and actually this, I think ordinance allows single-family houses on as little as 0.18 acre, 8,000 square feet. I want to buy, a 1 acre parcel to build a house on, and I submit a concept plan that fully complies with the objective requirements in the first part of this code. I'm just concerned that if we reject the concept plan, or council rejects the concept plan, as Louis intimated, an applicant might say, well, listen, I submitted a concept plan that met the objective criteria that you lay out in terms of use and height and minimum lot size, setbacks, et cetera, parking. I met these objective criteria, and normally, as we all know, if you meet the criteria of the zoning code, you're entitled to proceed. And here, it seems like, I'm not really sure how this is supposed to work together to have, in that situation, and obviously a single-family house is the extreme, but if a developer with an office building, for example, or a hospital came in and said, here's a plan that meets the zoning code, where does this zoning ordinance give us as a zoning body the right to say, no, we are rejecting or going to condition that proposal on some other requirements that we're going to come up with? I mean, I think Susan's sort of correct. I mean, it's almost like we're trying to make everything conditional, but we have very objective criteria. So I've got a lot of questions and concerns, and I agree with really what Louis said. To me, this property really needs to be developed in a holistic manner, and this seems to be inviting piecemeal development. So I don't know. That's a lot of comments, but can you just answer the first one? How do we deal with somebody who comes forward with a compliant plan and submits a concept plan? How would that work?
Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Brian Snyder from Hamilton County Planning and Development. Brian?
Good evening, Brian Snyder, Hamilton County Planning and Development, 138 East Court Street. Oh, okay. Okay, so the difference with this is that this would be a district text. It would not have a map amendment associated with it. So the property would still be zoned A. This would become a new district that's available for somebody to ask for. So when you came in with an office development on a piece of property, you would have to go through the full zone change process, which would require a public hearing with this commission and a public hearing and approval by the village council. And then you would have to have a final development plan approved by the building official. So because you would be going through the full zone change process, that's the difference between, when you walk in with a permit that meets all the criteria like a conditional use, there's always that argument that if it meets all the conditional use criteria, do you have to approve it? And sometimes people say yes, sometimes people say no. This is a zone change that would be acted on by council. So the criteria are very different than it would be for a conditional use, and there's no way you can walk in with a compliant plan because the property is not zoned HED until the council approves that zone change.
So, okay, now I think I understand, and I did see that reference in the text. It doesn't, none of the property actually gets this zoning classification until it's approved. So the property would stay zoned Residence A as it is now, and then if somebody wanted to develop something, but they could do it piecemeal. They could come in and say, for example, I want to build an office building on this 10 acres, and if the concept plan were approved, at that point, the zoning would be changed for that 10-acre parcel, and then those objective criteria would apply.
Correct, yes. If the village sold off individual pieces, then yes, they could come in at each individual time. I think the point of the creation of the text is not to create the vision. I don't think that wasn't my idea of what this was going to do. You have the property owned by the village. The village is going to, I assume, find a developer that has an appropriate vision that the village shares. And at that point, right now, the way the zoning code is written, there is no district that any of those types of developments would be able to ask for or fit in without numerous use and area variances. So the idea with this is that there's going to be a district that would be a district that you could seek for this property if the village found the appropriate developer with the appropriate vision. That's my understanding of what the purpose of the exercise was.
Are there other examples of this type of thing in Hamilton County?
No, this is fairly unique. It's not original, but it is fairly unique in that this is a kind of it's something between a planned unit development and a standard zoning district. It does have elements of both. It is a standalone district. It's not an overlay, but it does also have plan requirements for submission of plans and final development plan approvals like a planned unit development would. So it would be fairly strict as zoning districts in Hamilton County go.
Scott or Rich, do you have any questions for Mr. Snyder here?
My question is more for our own attorney, if he agrees with what was just said, that if somebody came in with a plan that meets the concept and doesn't need, are we going to be able to say no?
Well, so there won't be any way for a plan to meet the concept unless a concept has been approved by council previously. So there is no concept plan approved by this text. This is just a chapter that would go into the zoning code. It would be upon future developers to come up with a concept plan and have that approved. So no one would be able to walk in if this were adopted just as it stands today. Nobody would be able to walk in with any plan that met any concept plan because no concept plan is included in this text.
And am I correct that we're not changing the zoning code the zoning of the park right now until we have an actual plan or design that we're going to accept?
Right. This does not include a zoning map amendment. This is just the creation of the chapter in the text.
Thank you.
Rich, did you have any questions or comments?
No, my concern all along is that this wouldn't be an invitation to a lawsuit down the road by a developer, kind of like what happened however many years ago with the original litigation. So I think I'm satisfied that this protects us from that event happening. That was my concern from the beginning of this process.
I just have a couple of comments that I'd like to make for the record and hope that council will consider these as this moves forward. And I'm just going to walk through them. These aren't really questions. They're just comments as I went through it that I thought were important. I do think hospitals, I'm going to start just at the beginning of the regulation and move through. I think hospitals, I'm not sure that's an appropriate use type at this property, just given the intensity of use generally associated. We do allow medical facilities, doctor's offices, but I think hospitals, perhaps we need to define that a little bit more. I don't know why we're drawing a distinction between nonprofit event centers and for-profit event centers. I think in terms of use, either one would be appropriate. Moving on, I have questions about whether nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and continuing care retirement facilities are uses that the village would want to encourage on the site. Same comment with respect to hotels. I'm not sure that's a use we would want to encourage on the site. The retail uses in a mixed-use building I am in favor of. I'm curious why we chose 20% of the total building square footage. Obviously, we can vary that, but that seems... if you have a single floor, maybe of a 3-floor building with 2 floors of offices on top, maybe a third on the ground floor would be for retail use. Moving on to the required minimum lot. Well, the height regulations, 2.5 stories to me, I think is probably too short. I think we'd want to encourage higher buildings, certainly in certain areas. I think in terms of office use in particular, we might want to encourage higher buildings. Lot area for residential, 8,000 square feet. I think I did the math right. It looks like it would permit lots 50 by 160. That would be far smaller, I think, than anywhere else in the village. Perhaps we should consider permitting, I don't think it's multifamily, but maybe combined residential structures. I know that's popular these days, condominium type things. And then I think for all of the uses is half an acre, which I guess is okay. Generally in this, I think we should try to be as flexible as we can to encourage people to be creative with how they design developments so that we can utilize the property in the best possible way and preserve green space and make it an attractive feature for the village. I think the parking regulations, it's hard for me to really comment, but some of them didn't make a whole lot of sense. In particular, I thought the number 14, tennis, basketball, and racket clubs, 8 spaces for each indoor tennis, basketball court, 5 spaces for each outdoor tennis and basketball court. I mean, right now we have 3 tennis courts here at the Village Hall. That would mean you'd have to have 15 parking spots. That just seems like a lot to me. Again, I'd like to see more flexibility in the parking regulations, and I'm hoping that what we encourage here is some sort of almost like a PUD where we can work with a developer to make parking that makes sense. I think if I were a developer looking at these regulations, I'd be a little scared off, and I'd have a hard time trying to design a site that met these requirements. I thought it was a little odd that turning to the top of page 5, that we would allow fences or walls no greater than 7 feet and no less than 5 feet, which would be different than everywhere else in the village. I thought the landscaping standards were frankly a little light. I think there's a lot of existing landscaping on the property, and I appreciate the effort to try to encourage people to maintain that, but I think landscaping regulations have come a long way over the years, and we should look to places like Mason and other areas that have very detailed landscape regulations, especially for commercial properties. So I'd like to see more meat on that. I think I think we need to do some more work on the lighting of signage. We have to strike the right balance. If we're going to have commercial signage, it has to be visible to the traveling public, both during the day and at night. But obviously, we're concerned about light pollution. And then just generally, I was a little concerned about I understand it better now, but the process seems to turn over a lot of the zoning authority to council. And I guess if I were on council, that's the way I'd want it to be. But normally, I think this body is the body that typically deals with that. So I don't know if there's a way to strengthen the voice of the Planning Commission as we look at this. I just want to comment on another thing that Mr. Katz said earlier. I've been involved in this site since 2003, I think, is when I first got involved. And I very much hope to see it developed in a meaningful and long-lasting way that benefits the village. I think that things have changed since then in terms of our economic requirements. We also have opportunities to generate revenue that we didn't have then. So whatever ultimately we decide to do, I hope that we do it the right way. I agree with Louis. This is a tough time to be making this decision or starting to make this decision. I know there have been some discussions about potential users for the site, and I want to encourage that. But personally, I still believe that we haven't done enough to retain a developer who shares the vision with the village, who can go out and find users for this site. We have not actively marketed this site, as far as I know, and that to me is why it still sits vacant and why we're still dealing with this. But ultimately, council will have to decide if they want to go that route. Thank you for indulging me. Is there anyone else, either online or in the chamber, who wish to comment?
I have a few comments if it's an appropriate time. I agree with a lot of what Mr. Katz and with what Rick said. My main problem with this are the architectural requirements and restrictions. I was kind of aghast when I read it, and I ran it by some architects. Maybe it's time limited? Pardon?
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound. You are in the meeting now. There are 8 participants in the meeting. This meeting is being recorded. You are muted. You are unmuted.
Rich, are you able to hear now?
Rich?
Try now.
Okay.
So I just gave a very long-winded dissertation on my thoughts about the proposed ordinance, and then Susan had some comments, and then we were going to ask if other members of the public or of the Planning Commission had any other comments they wish to make. So, Susan?
All right. Again, my thoughts are about the architectural restrictions. I echo Rick's concern about that 2.5 stories is very limited. The part of the architectural regulations, facades shall have a top formed by a pitched roof or articulated cornice. Roofs may be pitched, use step parapet walls, 3-dimensional cornices, dimensional integrated textured materials, that whole part in page 7. It is unnecessarily restrictive. I think it limits the ability for creative design solutions to a new build site. It's really boxing us in. The zoning needs to allow opportunities to extend the valuable architecture identity of Amberley, which consists of very diverse architectural styles, and not prohibit it with these kind of restrictive and archaic architectural requirements. It sounds like it would restrict us to building things that look like whatever new construction looks like today, and not what good design should be that's designed for the purpose that it's intended. And based on these restrictions, this, the Mercy Building or the animal hospital would not be allowed. I don't know why we're going there, and why would we ever think of adding those restrictions in? It's beyond me. I just have concerns about it in general, but that's my thoughts right now.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Tammy?
Hey, Rich, this is Steve Cushard.
Hey, Steve. I think you want to speak, right?
I did. I just want to make a few comments just because of really, with the audio issues, I'm not sure exactly what went on, but I'll make it real brief if I can get on.
I think you're on.
Yep, you're on. We can hear you,
Everybody
Mr.
here,
Kuchar.
Steve?
Yes.
Oh, okay. My name is Steve Cushard, 3205 North White Tree Circle. Again, I understand all the audio issues we're having, so I couldn't really understand what some of the folks had talked about earlier. Some of the issues I think were okay. I submitted something to the village this afternoon that kind of gives some of my thoughts on some of the specific zoning text issues. I'm hoping that will become part of the public record because I don't want to have to read through it tonight with everything that's going on. And there were a couple comments. I guess one of the things that seems a little troubling to me is that we're talking about concept plans in the zoning text. To me, I think I'm all for deciding what we want on the property with the zoning text. I'm not sure that the concept plan part falls into that. That should be, again, part of your master planning document. I know you've heard that from me before, but the master plan really helps us determine whether if anybody comes up with a concept, if it fits what our needs are, and I think that may also address some of those legal concerns and concerns about if somebody just comes in and wants to build one house or something like that. But point being made is, I've put some stuff out there for review. I know we're still working on the text, and, I just hope you take a look at it and, we can continue to move forward.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? Rich, I think that's all the speakers we have tonight. Did you want to say anything else or close out the meeting? Oh, Scott, you want to? Rich, can you hear us still?
Yeah, I'm here. I hit it on mute. I thought I was off mute. I assume that we're going to incorporate all the comments that the village received in online form, whether it be written via email or submitted via paper, into the record, Scott?
Yes,
We don't
that is
review them all
correct.
now.
Yes, this is Scott Larmer. That is correct. I'd just like to cover some of the points between Brian and I. I'd like to just cover some of them so to give you a little more depth into how some of this code was, how it evolved. And Rick, I'm going to start with some of the comments you made. So I'm not going to be able to cover them all because you were talking faster than I could write. In terms of the uses, as it relates to hospital, as I indicated earlier, what was included in the code is anything that somebody had ever suggested occur on the property, because the important piece of this was to make sure that it got included as a principal permitted use, because if it was something, it was a particular type of use that we wanted and it was not included in the principal permitted use, it could not be on the property at all. So zoning works a little differently from that perspective. But in terms of the hospital, you suggest maybe define it better. The same thing on the event center. I think we have it clarified in there as nonprofit and profit. I don't know if there is a distinction between the two, but that's something that we can look at. On the nursing home use, once again, that was just a use that had been proposed at some point in time. I think your question is that still a viable use? We're not encouraging a nursing home or that kind of use on the property, but we are including it as a principal permit. The same comment on the hotel. This was suggested by council to include hotel as a principal permitted use. Brian, can you address the retail mix on the 20%? Because that one I don't recall the discussions about how we came up with 20% retail limit.
So that was really anticipated as being like a gift shop in a hospital or a hotel or something along those lines on the first floor, not necessarily like the first floor of a mixed-use building. That's why the percentage was so low. It's something that was permitted in the north site for the exact reason, and that discussion was had with, I think, the council working group. So it wasn't intended to have a first floor of retail and a second floor of office. It was more like a kind of a shop or a gift shop or a corner coffee shop in some other larger office building.
Well, I can appreciate that. Personally, I think we should allow and try to encourage mixed-use buildings that might include retail on the first floor and then office or other sort of income-generating uses in terms of the village's income on higher floors. And obviously that's consistent with what you see in Pleasant Ridge and many other places. So I'd like to see that broadened a little bit to encourage those types of uses.
I agree on that point as well, very strongly.
Another point that was mentioned in regards to the housing, you referred to them as small lots. That was intentional on council's part. Village Council has stated they would like to offer a different housing product than what is currently in the village. And they did not want to have shared walls. So that's why you don't see anything in here about combined structures. So these are intended to be still single family, but minimize the distance between lots and minimize the size of the property itself.
Scott, can I just make a comment, and this is not to you, but if this is something that came from Village Council, I would simply say that I guess I can understand that, but if the purpose is to, I've heard so much talk for many, many years about retirement type housing, and I think a small house on a small lot that is not some type of condominium or shared services type facility is not going to attract folks who may want to downsize in the village. What it's going to attract is people who are looking for a very low priced, low value home. I just think that's, I think I understand what the desire is, but I'm not sure that this is the type of zoning that's going to attract what we're looking for. And we've seen plans over the years for these patio homes, I think. And if that's what Village Council wants, I think we should flesh that out. But on a 50 by 160 lot, you're going to get a 1,500 square foot house that's probably going to be $150,000 or $200,000, and I just don't know if that's what we're trying to encourage or
That
not.
does not exist. That's not even possible.
Yeah, so I mean, right. I don't even know that makes sense from a development standpoint.
Actually, I think this is more maybe modeled after that development in Blue Ash up Plainfield, where it's very large houses on very small lots, where they're just kind of clustered together in these developments like that. I mean, there's things out there like that. That's probably more what they were thinking, just to minimize.
Can you do that though if you have, because there's a coverage, I thought it was, no maximum ground area coverage for single-family detached houses. So they could fill basically the whole lot as long as they complied with the setback. But
it's a new thing.
I just think they should perhaps give that a little more thought. I'm not an expert in that, of course, but it's that seems like a different type of housing than we have currently, for sure.
Okay, so noted. In regards to the height, I think we had some discussion, Wes, you can help me out on this one. We had some discussion about the height. I think we had 2.5 or 3 stories in there, and I think we had something else, or whichever was higher, something like that.
We're just trying to be consistent with what the other codes say. They say 2.5 stories. So we were just trying to be consistent with the code.
If we're trying to encourage office use, we're not going to get any, I don't think, if we're limited to 2.5 stories. I mean, we should, and maybe we, for residential, 2.5 seems appropriate, but if you want to encourage an office user, you might need to go 5 or 6 stories and in the back of the building, and even with a mixed use, you probably want to have at least 3. So, that's why I was wondering too, whether our fire service can accommodate that. I don't know, but it seems very restrictive if you're really talking about office use.
Okay.
Do we need to think about that for the Gibson site? Maybe we've got...
For fire trucks?
Well, ultimately the development, it's not the right time to talk about it, but it's just...
No, we're fine on that end.
Okay. I mentioned the parking.
Parking regulations. Brian, you're the best one that can talk about parking regulations. Parking regulations are difficult, and we struggled with this ourselves. So, Brian.
So there are no minimum parking requirements in the current code that would come close to helping us with this. The standard American Planning Association parking requirements that have been out since the 1950s are still the parking requirements that are generally accepted and used in most zoning codes. I've been hoping that somebody would put out a different model code or try and find some other analysis for parking spaces, but they haven't. These requirements are standard in most zoning codes in Hamilton County that I'm familiar with. We did put in the preamble to that section, the paragraph right before the beginning, stating that your parking plan needs to be approved as part of your concept approval, and that there is some deference given to shared parking or overlapping hours arguments to try and reduce the overall amount of parking on the site. But we felt like we had to have a number of something, and unless short of making them up out of thin air on our own, that's the best list that I had to go with.
I would just add that in this particular code, we're talking about creating flexibility for development. So there are requirements in here that I would expect Planning Commission would recommend that we not do. For example, one of them in the area of sidewalks. Yes, we want it to be a walkable type of a community, but there may be another way to have a sidewalk. It might be one of the cart paths or something that's more accessible. So I think what you see in here is that we put a lot in here to try to cover ourselves, but the expectation is the Planning Commission, through your role, would loosen up some of those items to make these items work. In regards to the fence height, that 7 foot, I believe that comes from the north site regulations, and that's related to dumpster, I believe. That's the only reason it would be allowed to go to 7 foot high, if I'm
right. Thank
correct
you.
on that. Yep. I don't know if there's anything else that stood out to you, Rick, that I did not cover, but that just gives you a little bit of the perspective of council.
The only other real material thing that I brought up, I think, was a little more discussion about regulating lighting around signage. Okay. And now that I say it, it's not only, if you're going to have commercial development, you're going to have lighting for parking lots and exterior lighting and things of that nature. So we may just need a little more thought given to that type of exterior lighting in general, path lighting. I mean, in my mind, I can see a commercial development where you have 4 or 5 retail locations or restaurants, and you might have 4 or 5 signs. I'm not sure that we've quite really dealt with that yet. Maybe we don't need to. I mean, maybe we don't. Maybe we can do that on a ad hoc basis as it comes in, but that was just...
Okay, I want to defer to Brian on that since we had some discussion about lighting. Do you have any perspective on that, Brian?
Lighting is in the outdoor or is in the parking section, so there is a maximum height of poles, a maximum illumination, foot candles at the property lines, residential versus regular property lines. And As far as signs, we did talk about, electronic signs are obviously prohibited as a specific item. Some signs can be internally illuminated and be extremely nice. Some are externally illuminated and, they shine on cars as they're driving by. I think we left it out, or the village, or I was directed to leave it out because it would be something that would come in as part of the concept approval, and then that would be a discussion. The freestanding sign itself would be a discussion as part of the concept plan. So since signage would have to be approved specifically as part of the plan, obviously details would have to be submitted for that as part of the concept review.
Thanks. Louis, did you want to make an additional comment?
The first one is Scott said that these were ideas that were put forth, and so it would have to fall in one of these ideas. That means it's excluding any new idea, anything creative that might really be beneficial to the village. So I see this generally, based on the entire discussion, as being restricting and without any need for it. Let's find a plan, let's zone for that plan, take everything into account once we find a good plan. We don't need this at all. It's a waste of everyone's time and effort and money to even put this in place, because it's going to do absolutely nothing but create issues as raised by all of us. I think it's foolhardy to proceed in this direction. Let's get a plan, let's push it through, let's get zoning for it, and all this stuff would be irrelevant. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts? Anyone online? Can you still hear us? Rich, Scott?
Brian, you said that this is kind of this is a unique thing to do. Is it common at all to preempt sort of planning in this way, to set this out before a plan and proposal is presented?
Yes, it's not unusual. This is something that's commonly included in a planned unit development ordinance or some kind of special district. There are a number of examples of that. Form-based codes, specific planned unit developments, special districts like this that were created for a specific area that has a different character than the rest of the jurisdiction. So if there's a place in your jurisdiction that you want specific architectural guidelines, landscaping guidelines, or something more than what you have in your base code that applies to everywhere else, a lot of times there will be some version of this type of district created for that area. So that's not what I meant was unusual. The kind of the process of defining the area and then not doing a map amendment at that time and having everybody go through the individual map amendment, that's kind of unique, because that's what I was referring to.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments? Rich and Scott, are you still on?
Yes. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I think we're done, unless you guys have any other comments. I don't know, Rich, if you want to...
No comments for me. I assume we don't have any new business. If we don't, we can adjourn.
Well, I shared a lot of both of your comments, Rich and Susan. You know, if we're going to do housing there, it needs to be upscale, in my opinion, and there'd be no reason not to be upscale. So that's, you know, I think I've seen other developments, thinking of Blue Ash in particular, and you know, they're very upscale, and I think we should zone for that.
Well, my opinion on housing is that we lose money on it based on the taxes we get, plus the amenities we need to provide for sewer, streets, police, etc. So I don't think housing makes any sense whatsoever. So that's my position on that.
So Scott, I guess the way this works functionally is that we've now had this hearing, and council will get the minutes of this meeting in terms of our recommendation. We don't need to create some sort of specific recommendation, do we, or do we?
This is Scott Larmer, Village Manager. You do need to make a recommendation, and you don't have to make it tonight, but it does need to be a recommendation. The recommendation is either to approve or approve with conditions or denial and your reasons for such. So Village Council is looking for your direction on the zoning text. So if there are areas where you want staff to do some research or add items to the zoning text, that's what we need some direction on. You've already provided us with some of that tonight. So between Wes, Brian, and myself, we will make some of those items and then bring that back at the next meeting. But ultimately, the Planning Commission needs to make a recommendation to Village Council about the zoning text. I should retract. I don't think you can turn it down. I think you just have to make recommendations on it.
Well, my recommendation at this point would be that we table it and allow you to try to address some of the comments that we've heard, and that we take this up at a future meeting after you've had the chance to do that, and that in the meantime we work on sort of more formal recommendation that we can actually pass on to council. That would be my thought. I don't know what anybody else thinks.
Scott, can I ask a point of clarification? You're saying that if a use is not on there, that we can't consider it, so someone could not ask for a variance to have a different use on that property?
That is correct.
So there's no variances?
That's correct.
Really?
That's crazy.
Why couldn't we change?
Brian, you want to address that,
why couldn't
Brian?
we change the zoning code in response to a concept plan that we liked?
So I think it's item number 11 in the list of permitted uses, says that the Planning Commission can determine that a use is similar to the uses listed in that list. But for instance, if somebody came in with an industrial development, which clearly doesn't fit that list, and the only way that they could get that approved in this district would be for a use variance to be granted as part of the process by council. And use variances, while I believe that they've been deemed to be legal in the state of Ohio, are extremely discouraged by general planning and zoning practices and staffs. I don't know, Kevin, if you have some thoughts on use variances. They're generally not something that you want to get involved in if you can't help it.
This would be a use variance, right? Because the zoning, as I understand where the process, if we have to change the text, it would be a zone change, that would change the text of the underlying, use regulations, but it wouldn't be a variance.
If you proposed a text amendment as an individual, that's also something I'm not very familiar with. That usually comes either from the Planning Commission or from council itself. I've not seen somebody apply for a text amendment and a zone change for a development at the same time to change your code to allow them to do what they want to do. That's not typically something I've seen. Unless somebody came forward with a use that everybody liked and the village went through the process of changing the code to allow that use, then that would be different, obviously.
Well, that's what I guess I had in mind. Somebody came forward with the concept that was unique and nobody had ever considered before, but everybody thought it was a great idea. There's nothing stopping us from changing section 154.84.1 to add a new permitted use.
Right, but not as part of the concept plan review for that development. It would have to be its own text amendment process. Or you would have to shoehorn it into number 11 on that list and say it's similar to one of the uses on the list already.
I think the concern, though, is that we're sort of shutting off potential fabulous ideas that nobody's conceived of yet. And I don't know how much of a concern that is to me, but I understand the concern. I mean, I'd hate to think there's some great developer out there who's got a great idea, looks at this and says, well, it's too much of a hassle, I'm going to go somewhere else.
Sure, and it's a list and it can be changed, just like all the other numbers are in there. Kind of the thing that I've really tried to do is give the framework for the overall district, but the actual numbers, the list of uses, the lot sizes, the minimum setbacks, all of those things were kind of created in discussions with Wes and Scott, and then also a lot of them came from the council working session. So we've had this similar discussion about the uses and whether there should be more or less several times already.
It just seems to me like it's incredibly broad and incredibly restrictive all at the same time. I don't know. It's like it took everybody's ideas and just put it all in one document without really a cohesiveness to it. But
Well,
I almost feel like there's a plan that we don't know. Like you guys are zoning some plan that we're not privy to or something, because it just seems that random to me that all these specifics are on there. But if it was modeled on another location, that would sort of make me feel better. But if this was just all made up for this without a plan, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Well, again, it's the framework that we were, that I was most interested in coming up with, that the how you allow for the village to both permit what they want in some way, but also restrict the future uses to prevent things that they didn't want in the future. And so this kind of philosophical discussion about whether it should be more stuff or less stuff that we're talking about, or if it should be vague or very specific, it is completely up to the planning commission and council as to how that goes. Like I said, all those numbers can be changed, that all those lists can be added to or deleted from as part of this process until it's adopted. Then that's the point of the meetings.
So my recommendation is that we table this until Scott and Mr. Snyder have had the opportunity to address some of these concerns, and that we take this up at a subsequent meeting. So I guess, do I move for that?
I would second that. That makes sense to me.
Tammy?
I couldn't hear, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Rich, I moved that we table this and make no recommendation at this time to give the administration time to address some of the issues we've raised, and that we make a formal recommendation at a subsequent meeting after they've had a chance to revise the proposed text. And it was seconded by Scott Rubenstein.
Assuming we go that route, my question would be to Scott Larmers, when could we be ready to address this again by this committee?
This is Scott Larmer, village manager. That depends on when we knock this out. So you've asked us to do a variety of things, look at a couple different areas. That could be as soon as your August Planning Commission meeting, or it might be the September Planning Commission meeting. It really just depends.
My only request would that we would expedite it as soon as possible. So if we can be ready by August, I guess we won't know. That's based upon how quickly that can get done. I have no idea. So I don't want to pressure you all to do it. I'm going to rely upon you all to give your best estimate on when that should come back up to zoning.
Okay, so noted.
Any further discussion on the
Are we all
motion?
in favor? I guess there's a motion pending. All in favor?
You gonna do a roll call, Tammy?
Yeah, we'll do a roll call vote. Rich Bardak,
Rich, are you yay or nay?
did we drop again?
We have a quorum.
It dropped. Rich, can you hear us? Let me call again.
In tonight's meeting, we should give folks another chance to voice their opinion after you've revised the document.
I agree with Rick.
Okay, that concludes this
Is
part
that
of the meeting.
Yeah, I think that's the conclusion of this meeting, unless there's any new business. Are we all done?
Assuming there's no new business, I assume we're adjourned. That's correct.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you.
Take care.
Scott.
See y'all.
Thank you.